والسلام على أشرف المرسلين السيد رئيس الأكاديمية الجزائرية للعلوم والتكنولوجيا أستاذ مارينوس ضيفنا الكريم، سيدات وسادة أعضاء الأكاديمية الجزائرية للعلوم والتكنولوجيا، زملائي الأساتذة، بناتي وأبنائي الطلبة، فصلت الإعلام، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. باسمي وباسم أعضاء طاقم وليبوم للعلوم والتكنولوجيا نرحب بكم في جامعتنا جامعة وليبوم للعلوم والتكنولوجيا. إذا اليوم نستقبل أعضاء الأكاديمية الجزائرية للعلوم والتكنولوجيا في جامعة العلوم والتكنولوجيا، ونستقبلهم اليوم محاضرة تقام هنا في الجامعة، محاضرة إن شاء الله ستكون بفائدة لطلابنا وأساتذتنا، ويكون فيه إن شاء الله تبادل علمي، وإحنا على كل حال يسرنا أن تكون أحداث مثل هذه، ونرحب دائما بالأكاديمية للعلوم والتكنولوجيا، ونقول لهم هاي جامعة وليبوم للعلوم والتكنولوجيا مفتوحة لكم لكل تنظيم، رانا الأبواب مفتوحة، وإن شاء الله يكون فيه تبادل بيننا وتعاون بيننا، وإن شاء الله لفائدة الجامعة، لفائدة الطلبة، لفائدة العلم ولفائدة بلادنا إن شاء الله. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
شكرا سيدي المدير. الآن السيد رئيس الأكاديمية الجزائرية للعلوم والتكنولوجيا تفضل بكلمة.
السلام عليكم، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سيد مدير جامعة وليبوم للعلوم والتكنولوجيا، السيد مارينوس ضيفنا الكريم، السيدة نائبة رئيس الأكاديمية للعلوم والتكنولوجيا، زملائي زميلاتي أعضاء الأكاديمية الجزائرية للعلوم والتكنولوجيا. Je suis très heureux d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui à l'Université des sciences de la technologie Wallonie-Madienne à l'occasion donc de cette conférence. Je suis d'autant plus heureux que je consacre ma première sortie en tant que président de l'académie fraîchement élu à l'université où j'ai préparé ma thèse de doctorat il y a bientôt une trentaine d'années. Donc c'est un grand plaisir et un grand honneur. Je remercie Monsieur le recteur de nous avoir ouvert les portes et aujourd'hui et de les avoir ouverts à travers le mot qu'il vient de prononcer pour qu'on puisse organiser d'autres événements et d'autres conférences à l'ISTHP. Et je crois qu'il n'y a pas mieux que l'ISTHP parce que nous sommes dans le milieu estudiantin, le milieu scientifique, pour organiser de telles rencontres, pour faire bénéficier le maximum de personnes intéressées. Et c'est ça justement le rôle de l'université, de notre académie, c'est de diffuser le savoir aussi bien dans la société que de le partager avec les institutions du savoir. Je remercie M. Samarawi et M. Harrat de la section sciences de la nature et de la vie de notre académie qui ont pris cette excellente initiative en invitant donc une personnalité donc, de renom dans le domaine de l'écologie des zones humides. Et vous savez tous, surtout les spécialistes, l'importance des zones humides, de l'écologie des zones humides, notamment dans le contexte actuel du changement climatique. Les questions donc de biodiversité en particulier seront, je suppose, abordées par M. Hott. Donc je renouvelle donc mes remerciements à M. le recteur et je souhaite la bienvenue à tous les chercheurs, tous les étudiants, qu'ils soient de l'université ou d'ailleurs, et je les remercie d'avoir de participer donc d'assister à cette conférence, et je déclare donc ouverte donc cette conférence pour présenter donc M. Hott va nous présenter sur sa conférence. Je vous remercie et je vous rends la parole. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, M. le Président. À présent, j'invite M. Hamad à présenter M. Hott avant de passer proprement dit à la conférence.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le recteur, Monsieur le président de l'ingénieur de sciences et technologies, Madame la vice-présidente, Monsieur Marinus. Donc, c'est un honneur pour l'Académie, pour l'Université de de vous accueillir dans cette enceinte pour nous parler de l'impact du changement climatique sur les zones humides. Mais avant tout, j'aimerais exprimer cette allocution en anglais. Donc, the Algerian Academy of Science and Technology has its scientific plan. The organization Conference on Climate Change and its impact on wetland with the contribution of the University of Science and Technology, Rogers University. This conference is presented by Professor Marinus. Dear Professor Marinus, we thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and we are very grateful, delighted with your presence among us. And I also thank very much our guests, our invited scientific colleagues of the Academy of Science and Technology, students and journalists for their presence and for the question which we follow the conference. Before your presentation, Professor, just a brief introduction of your scientific career and experience in the field of wetland. Monsieur Marinus is a professor at North Dakota State University in the United States. He has a particular interest in wetlands and education for over 30 years, with particular emphasis on pollution research, people remediation, and wetland awareness. He has participated in numerous projects around the world, most recently in Mexico, Colombia, Peru, as a specialist for the Fulbright US program. The Fulbright program is a highly selective merit-based scholarship system supported jointly by the United States and countries wishing to participate. Professor Marinus is a permanent member of the Society of Wetland Scientists, and he is editor-in-chief of scientific journals such Journal of Wetlands and Journal of Wetlands People Remediation. He published more than 100 peer-reviewed papers accepting our invitation. Welcome in Algeria. We are really excited to learn more about your scientific career, your experience in your project, and particularly about the impact of the climate change on the wetlands and how to mitigate this effect. Thank you very much. You are loved.
Monsieur le recteur donc, est appelé à d'autres obligations, donc il va nous quitter. And now I call Professor to present this talk. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, everybody. First of all, it's a great honor to be here. In the early 70s, I visited Tunisia, and at the end of the previous century, I visited Morocco. And I always thought, what is in between? Because it has to be really beautiful. So I'm here, and I'm very grateful, first of all, for the invitation. What I want to talk to you about is not necessarily a happy story, and you'll see why I say that. First of all, the title slide, there are two interesting things about it. I looked for a nice font for the title. This font is called Algerian. I thought that was interesting, so I had to use that for the title. You see hippos in water there. That photo I took 2 weeks ago, not in Africa. That photo was taken in Colombia. The hippos were introduced by the drug lord Pablo Escobar, and I had the pleasure of being able to visit there. So these are hippos in lakes put there by the drug lord, and where it becomes a sad story, apart from the fact that he was a drug lord, is that he was arrested in 1996 or thereabouts. The estate where they were was abandoned, and now the hippos are not 4 but 200, and they're threatening to go into the Amazon River, and if they do, that could be an ecological disaster. So we have hippos in South America because of people, and that is really kind of what this story is about. Okay, so first of all, I have to acknowledge the people who invited me. Dr. Bujema Samarowi and I have been in contact for maybe 3 years or so, and we started talking about how I was interested in trying to expand knowledge, education about wetlands around the world, but particularly in Africa. And since then, Dr. Samarowi has become an associate editor for wetlands, which I'm very grateful for. And just by that appointment, we are now getting more submissions from not just Algeria, but the whole of North Africa. Dr. Harad, also thank you so much for inviting me. I put your name the wrong way around, I think, but it's always confusing in different countries how that works. And of course, particularly the Algerian Academy of Sciences and Technology, really much appreciated. Otherwise, there are so many college students and friends around the world who've given me great ideas. I'm not going to list them all here, and I've had funding from different places. Okay, so a very brief outline here. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, just briefly. Then we'll talk about what is a wetland. I assumed there were many people here that know nothing about wetlands, really, and I've learned already there are physicists here and mathematicians and landscape architects, and you should all know about wetlands, and the field of wetlands is highly interdisciplinary, so we even have mathematicians working on it. Then I'll say a little bit about the Anthropocene, what it is, and how this is important for wetlands. And then what will happen with predicted climate change, and then I'll show some solutions. So a bit about me. I'm from the Netherlands, born and raised. I got my PhD in '91, and it was on pollution of coastal wetlands. Then I worked for 2 years in South Carolina, not on metals, but on a sulfur compound that is specific to sport grasses, and that turned out to be a whole interesting story as well. Then I needed a permanent job, so I went to University College Dublin, where they said, you can do anything you want in research, but we have no money for you. And I said, well, that's a good challenge, so I did that. And so I worked on wetlands, freshwater, saltwater, high altitude, low altitude, constructed wetlands for industrial purposes, peatlands, basically everything that I could do. Since 2006 then, I went to North Dakota State University. I always say there was nothing wrong with Ireland, but it was time just in my life to go somewhere else. And North Dakota State University was the challenge I needed. Very different climates, very, very different situation, but interesting to work. I started there as head of department and as a full professor already, because I've become that in Dublin. And again, worked on everything to do with wetlands. And then, in terms of my career, what really propelled it was I was asked to become editor-in-chief of the journal. And first I said no, and then they said please, please, please. And I said, I don't know if I can do that. And then they said again, please, please, please. And then I took the job. And since then, I realized more recently that what it gave me is probably the widest overview of the field of wetland science you can have, because I get the latest of the latest research across my desk. About one manuscript per year. Per day, not per year. It's about 350 to 400 per year. And so I've been doing that since 2012, and I hope it has improved the journal. It's certainly been interesting and continues to be interesting. I've collaborated China, Taiwan, South Korea, Mexico more recently, South Africa, I'm probably going to, I'm not there yet, and Poland, and there are a number of other places. It is truly a wonderful experience to do this. So what is a wetland, first of all, for those of you who don't know how we define them? This is the description that Ramsar says, and they then have a somewhat stricter definition under the convention. It's called the Ramsar Convention because the first time this came about was in Iran, in the city of Ramsar. I always have a lot of fun with students. I go, what do you think Ramsar means? And they think it's an abbreviation. They wouldn't even think about the fact that this was established in Iran. It says there basically that anything wet is a wetland, and it says that systems that the depth of which at low tide does not exceed 6 meters. This is always baffling to people. Why 6 meters? Why not 5? Well, the Ramsar Convention was originally organized to protect birds. And birds that depend on wetlands, it was their main concern. Diving ducks, which feed in shallow lakes, they tend to go no deeper than 6 meters. That is the 6 meters. It was there defined as a bird habitat. That's very careful. In French, zone humide, marécage, marais, fagne, tourbière, and I have the Arabic spelling. I don't know if it's correct. That's what Google Translate told me, so I have to believe it. Those are wetlands. Why are they important? This is a question we get. Well, first of all, they really are the give you an idea, in the United States, if you own an acre, which is a part of a hectare, 2.5 acres is a hectare. If you own an acre of land that can be restored back to wetlands in the region where I am, there is a system called mitigation banking where wetlands are destroyed on purpose by, say, a company that needs a new building. They destroy so many acres. They pay money for that. The money goes into a bank, then somebody else can use that to restore a wetland. The land around us is among the most valuable agricultural land in the world, and you can buy it for about $8,000 per hectare. But in my region for mitigation banking, if you restore a wetland, you get a minimum of $60,000 per acre. That says something about the value in dollars. There is nothing. Agriculture doesn't produce as much value, neither do forests, not even rainforests. Here's one reason why. They are hydrological buffers. They provide water during droughts. They collect the water and hold it. And when there are floods, they store it. If you take wetlands out, you get flash floods. You get places that are covered by water and flooding and a lot of damage. They clean our water very effectively. They remove 90%, if not more, of pollutants. And it is any pollutants. Metals, organic pollutants, artificial hormones, you name it, they take it out. They even take out viruses and bacteria. I've seen systems that were built for the purpose. You put in polluted water one end, you can drink the water that comes out the other end. They do that very effectively. They provide habitat for animals and plants. They are migration corridors. Often in many places, they are the last places that are being impacted by building, and so they remain an exit for animals and plants to migrate along. They provide food. The biggest crop in the world is rice. It's a wetland plant. But in many places in the world, fish, frogs, birds, they reproduce in it, and so very important. Materials, thatched roofs, papyrus, the first paper, that came from wetlands. Recreation as well, and don't underestimate how important that is for people to go and look at birds and walk around. I looked up the Ramsar wetlands in Algeria. You can go on the website for Ramsar, and these circles indicate there's a number in them. That's the number of Ramsar sites that are in that immediate region. So near Algiers there are 4 of them. Near Annaba there are 28. That to me was quite astounding, and the total number is the total of those numbers there. And there are Ramsar sites in Sahara and in southern Algeria. So when we talk about wetlands and water conservation, I always have to go back to this book, and I don't know if you know it. That book is called Cadillac Desert because it is about the desert southwest of the United States, how that was developed because people started driving cars. So in the early 30s, 40s, 50s, people started just going on a tour. Cars were available to normal people, and the family would go on a vacation. They would hit the road and go somewhere. That is why it refers to the Cadillac. Where would they go? Well, they went to the southwest often for the weather, which is where Las Vegas is and Phoenix. And these cities really only grew because tourists started coming, particularly Las Vegas. But there was no water, very little water. It talks about the water politics of the region, how a city like Los Angeles particularly grew from a small fishing village to this enormous city that has no water. They're now talking about bringing water from where I live in Minnesota all the way to Las Vegas just to supply water. That's insane. That book talks about it, and one thing I learned about that is that there are different perceptions in the United States between West and East. See, here's the map of the United States in terms of net precipitation. So the amount of water that falls versus the amount of The red areas, I have no idea. What do I do? Oh, I see. Rappeler, that's the one. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. I didn't want to. The red is where the value is negative. The green is where the value is positive. So all that red area is on the left, basically following that line along the Mississippi River. And I live exactly on that line in Minnesota. So go west of the line and you have less water falling than evaporates off the land or evapotranspires. That means that a state like North Dakota, which is where the university is located, where I work, nowhere in North Dakota has enough water out of precipitation. So where does it come from? It is imported from other states. For instance, further west, the blue is the mountains, the Rocky Mountains in Idaho and Wyoming. That is where it comes from, through the Missouri River. And otherwise, they use groundwater. And so, and then if you go to the east, there are some green areas. And then in the west, really very green. That is Washington State, Seattle, where it always rains. So the United States is divided into two. Okay. Well, here's Algeria. Of course, it's also divided into two, but along a north-south gradient. The left one is the precipitation rate. The right side is the evapotranspiration rate. And you have kind of a similar problem. There's enough water here along the coast, but there's not when you go inland. Now, what does that do? When you talk about how people think about water, in the United States, conservation of water and wetlands in the east means conservation of ecosystems. If you go to places like Tennessee, to North Carolina, people are concerned about the endemic salamanders and the plants that grow there. They have enough water there. That is water conservation. But if you go to the west, it means conserving water for consumption. That is a completely different attitude towards how we think about conservation. If you don't have enough water, it is understandable that you might be less worried about protection of plants and animals. Well, in Algeria, and I'm guessing, but it is very likely the same, if you depend on an oasis in south central Algeria, yeah, you may be concerned about fish and frogs and plants, but when it comes down to it, people need water. And so if it's not there, it's taken from groundwater. Many places under the Sahara, there is a lot of groundwater, but in other places, particularly in the United States, there are watersheds like the Oglala, which is one of the biggest watersheds in the whole of the United States. It's nearly gone. And it's going saline. There are in states like Oklahoma and Nebraska, already farms where people have to leave the land because they can't grow anything anymore. It's not coming from the sky, they've pumped it out of the ground and it's gone. So now the Anthropocene, what is it? This is a definition I found, but it's quite profound. It's the current geological epoch that we live in which humans are the primary cause of permanent planetary change. Now, when you think about that, that is quite profound. It's planetary and it's permanent. That is amazing. It's the first time this has happened, and there are people who say, well, it's not so bad. Well, I think it's bad, particularly when you think about wetlands. I went to look when I first started thinking about this presentation for places that might be pristine, whatever that means. And so I typed in wetlands in Antarctica and pollution in Antarctica. And I found this text from the Polar Institute, which is well known for its research. And it's that first sentence. It struck me immediately. I wanted to see if there were places where there was no pollution. It says the levels of pollutants in Antarctica are, in general, lower than elsewhere in the world. They don't don't say there are no places, there are places that have no pollution. They say that on average, compared to other places, there is less pollution. It means even there is pollution. And when you go a bit further thinking about that, I'll get to that in a minute, that is horrible to be able to realize that. Then, here, this is from 2021, Code Red for Humanity. Wildfires everywhere, also here in Algeria. And I traveled in other places in the world, there were fires everywhere. So what does this mean for Earth to start with? There is pollution even in Antarctica. And I had to think about that a bit. But of course, if we are pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and nitrogen oxide and sulfur oxides, they travel around the world. So even if there are places, in places like Antarctica, where maybe no human has ever walked, they are polluted. And then whatever comes out of the atmosphere. Climate change is part of global change. I actually don't like the term climate change so much, because when I go to a farmer in Minnesota, where in the winter we get minus 40 degrees Celsius, they go, well, a little bit warmer is not so bad. Our growth season is getting warmer, longer. But it leads to land use change as well, which is the other big component of global change. And the two together are really not very good for us. What this means is that there are no places left anywhere in the world that have not been impacted by humans. That is horrible. Okay, so what does it mean for wetlands? There are no pristine wetlands. That word has no meaning anymore. Relatively pristine, well, that is not a good term either. Most wetlands that existed a few centuries ago have been destroyed, and of the remaining, and most is not entirely true, we estimate, I'll show you that in a minute, there's a paper that originally there was thoughts that 70–80% of wetlands have gone. It's probably more likely 23 to 25%, because the earlier studies were biased by areas where people live, particularly. But all of the ones we have are polluted, to some extent. Some less than others, but all of them have. They have. If you put more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, more will dissolve in the water, the pH will go down. So we changed that already. All are changing due to human-induced global change, all of them. Otherwise it would just be natural variation. Most have been hydrologically altered. It's very rare to find a wetland or a lake that has no change in hydrology. Very rare. Most, if not all, well, most probably have exotic species living in them, whichever way you define exotic. Okay. So these are estimates from a book called Wetlands by my colleague Bill Mitch. It is a little bit out of date. This is from 1993, but it shows numbers for how much wetland has been lost for each state. It's intriguing. You see there, if you go to California on the west, it says minus 91. If you go to North Dakota and Minnesota, it says 49, minus 49, minus 42. You're inclined to say, oh, it's much worse in California than in North Dakota. Not necessarily. In California, they have maybe 10 wetlands. And so if you destroy 9 of those, you have that percentage. It's a desert country, a desert state, there aren't that many wetlands. And that estimate also probably is an overestimate, because I don't think they included wetlands at high altitude, for instance. But if you go to North Dakota alone, it is part of the prairie pothole region. I don't know if you know what it means, but it's millions of little depressions in the landscape. In North Dakota alone, it is estimated that there are 1 million wetlands. If close to 50% have been destroyed already, that means that there used to be 2 million. That's a different number from California, right? So that is the situation there. In China, where I've been not so long ago, if we go to the head of the chicken, the Chinese always tell me China looks like a chicken. The head is to the northeast. If you go to the head of the chicken and you zoom in first of all, that is the place where Russia, North Korea, and China meet, which is a fabulous place to visit. So I had to put this in. I was there in 2016 with my wife and son. And you're looking out towards the Pacific coast, where China fizzles out. They don't like that. To the right is North Korea, and to the left is Russia. Very interesting. There, that area, and so that is the head of the chicken again, and that point where that I just pointed out is in the right corner there, where those rivers meet. This is a map of 1970, and all the purple is wetlands. Here is the year 2010. Why did that happen? China in the 1970s had huge problems. There was no food. Colleagues my age were talking about how they suffered greatly. They didn't have enough food. They pushed to grow more rice. And so where do you grow rice? You put it in wetlands. And so that northeast corner, the bill of the chicken, that was the biggest wetland complex in China. It's called the Zhenjiang Plain. 90% plus of all the wetlands have indeed been destroyed. I've been there. It is horrendous. It is all rice and some corn and some soybeans, but mostly rice. This is the map from a recent paper by Fluet Chouinard. You can see there 2023. The more red it is, the more wetlands have disappeared. And so there are places that get close to 100%. Algeria on the coast is better off. It's maybe in the order of 20%. But everywhere there are wetlands, there have been declines. And so from this paper is where the current estimate comes that worldwide, truly, if you include all lands, then certainly 25% of wetlands are gone. There are some other issues. If you are a farmer in China and you're asked to grow rice for the country, you can only go so deep into the water. So what is lost is biased towards shallow wetlands. The shallower the wetland, the more likely it has been damaged or destroyed. All right, so what's happening here? Wetlands in North Africa during the mid-Holocene were at least 5 times the area today. Okay. That change is not due to human impacts necessarily, but there were way more wetlands in the past than there are now. That trend is only exacerbated by us. This is a prediction. Degradation of wetlands in the Sahel is driving migration. That is bringing across the point that if those wetlands disappear, people start to move. We know this, of course. So it creates famine, it creates unrest, it creates wars over water. And then there's this. We don't stop inland. This is a picture I took when I flew from Shanghai to Changchun. You follow the coast of China. This is over Dalian. It is well known for its seafood, but they have captured everything from the sea they can capture. So what do? You start growing things. How do you do that? You build these aquaculture systems. And I wish I had a pointer, but I don't. You can sort of follow that line that goes like that. That's the original coast. That entire coastline has been destroyed for aquaculture. And so they grow seafood and things like that. This is troubling. Here's something from 2023, March 2023, a report for the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. Aquaculture growth potential in Algeria. So if we don't pay attention, you will have it here as well. Which is good maybe for the economy and the people until all those good ecosystem services have been destroyed and you end up with a lot of pollution and places you can't live in. Here it talks a bit about the challenges that there might be in terms of aquaculture for Algeria. By the way, Subir and so if you want to share this presentation with people, you're certainly welcome to do that. summarizing threats to wetlands. Areas with high precipitation are being converted to agriculture and aquaculture. Wetlands of dry region are being drained for drinking water and irrigation. Whichever way you do it, wetlands are being damaged and destroyed. Shallow wetlands have been converted more traditionally, if that's a word, than the deeper wetlands, but now the deeper wetlands are threatened as well by agriculture. Okay, what do we do? First of all, we need to protect existing wetlands way better than we have done. We need to restore wetlands and natural waterways where possible, and we need to create new wetlands. I'll talk about that a little bit, and there are some great examples. Protecting existing wetlands. It needs to be protected by law. Any other way is really not very good. And there are not so good examples. The United States is not a good example. The United States has a law called the Clean Water Act. It's not about wetlands, it's about clean water. Politically, there have been challenges. The United States is a bad example if you want to protect wetlands. Good examples. The best one, by far, right now in the world is China, the mainland People's Republic of China. I call it the best one compared to the others, Taiwan and South Korea. South Korea was the first country in the world to protect wetlands. It has a Wetland Conservation Act. Taiwan came in 2013. I was a little bit involved with that, more with language issues, but it's kind of interesting to have seen that. Both Taiwan and South Korea include rice paddies as being wetlands because traditional paddies have their values. When I was in China in 2016, I had several meetings and people asked me, what do you think about this problem with the Ramsar definition? By its definition, wet ecosystems down to 6 meters, you could say rice paddies are included. In China, rice is grown at a level that is way up from what they do in South Korea and other places. It is many kilometers, fields with rice, and everything has been destroyed. And I made the point, I said, no, rice should not be protected. I disagree with the Ramsar definition because it really is just growing mice in a wet field. That's what it is, or wheat or whatever. That's what it is. It's crop production, it's not a wetland. Then they asked, well, what about aquaculture? That's shallow, it could be a wetland. I said, no, again, same story. It's just growing food. So the Chinese one is exceptional in that it says wetlands are, and it gives examples, down to 6 meters, follows the Ramsar, except rice production, aquaculture, and salt pans. Those are excluded in China. And that is why this is by far the best one. If you put a law like that in place, you do need to think about how that could go wrong. That was implemented only in May 2022, I think, and so we'll have to see now what that's going to do in China. Most other countries, and I suspect that's the same here in Algeria as well, is they're protected maybe through Ramsar as an important wetland, or maybe if they're part of a national park or a refuge of some sort. And that is not sufficient. So, what do we do? Okay, where we can, we should restore wetlands. The question is, can we really do that? The best study I am aware of was this, a meta-study by Moreno Mateos. And what they did, and I have it here written out, they used studies from 621 wetlands around the world. They looked at age of restoration as well. And the conclusion was that even wetlands that were restored 100 years ago, and there are some, the ecosystem surfaces measured by the chemistry, the soil chemistry, and biodiversity will only be restored to about 80% of what it was. You can restore the hydrology, that's easy. You can bring in the water, that's engineering. But otherwise you reach 80% if you're lucky, and even after 100 years it is that low. So you will never get back what you had. Okay, then create new wetlands. And we'll go to the Netherlands where I grew up. I studied in Amsterdam, and if you look east, there's Amsterdam. Oh, that is there. If you zoom in a bit of that, so now there's Amsterdam in the left corner, and you see an arrow to an area that clearly looks different. There are no houses, there's no agriculture. That land is artificial, entirely, not just where the circle is. The land that you see there with the kind of square shapes, the Dutch built dikes in a lake that was a lake. You built a dike, you put a pump on it, you pump the water out, now you have land. Great, that land is meters below sea level, but you have land. I grew up with that. To me, that was normal. If you grow in a place that is 5 meters below sea level, you don't actually think about the fact that there are pumps going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They keep going. And now when I go back, you know, sometimes I ask my friends, and like, are you not worried that somebody might turn off the pumps? I go like, no, it works. And of course, in people's lifetimes, it has worked until it doesn't. In 1953, there was a big storm that killed many people because the dikes didn't hold. So here, this is even closer up, and now you can tell you don't have to be a remote sensing specialist that there's open water and grasses, but there are no buildings. Okay, this is the story of it. How was it formed? They tried to make land, but they couldn't quite pump the water out. The dike was porous. They couldn't make it impermeable. They kept pumping. The water didn't go out. So what was the solution? This is really a very Dutch solution. They turned it into a nature reserve. They said, oh, well, we can't pump it dry. You know what? We'll call it a nature reserve. By now, it's a Ramsar site. It's a national park. It's completely artificial, the entire thing. It's actively measured. The geese came in by themselves, but the horses were brought in. They added all kinds of things. And now it's even a reference wetland for other situations, or it could be. It could be an example of what we can do. The important point is that there was never a wetland there to start with. The water may have been shallower than 6 meters, so by some definition, but it was open water. There was no wetlands, and if you look at it, it certainly, in every way, looks like a wetland. Add to this another concept, sponge city. I don't know if you've heard about it. Algiers should know about it. There are maybe some landscape architects here. You would know about this. It was first thought of in 2000 in China. And the idea is that you basically make the city more absorbent, so that when you get big flash floods, the water will, and rains will soak into the ground. So there's a website here that talks about it. Could it solve China's water crisis? I've seen quite a few wetland parks, as they call them. And one of them I'll show you here. That's not the wetland park. What I'm looking at here, there's China and then there's Taiwan, and that's where we're going. Officially not part of the People's Republic, although the Chinese think differently. You know the story there. If you go to Taipei, which is the capital, then it looks like this. There are rivers flowing through. Taipei, like many cities, was built in a wetlands. It was flat. That was why they went there. Well, that if you look at that area, there is actually one of the airports, and there's a bit of river there. And when you zoom in, you can see that's a typical example of how we as humans have dealt with rivers. You cannot let them go like that. They have to be straight, and you cannot have them flood, so you build enormous dams. That is what that one looks like. Well, what that creates, Taiwan is in a typhoon region. They get easily in the season 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 millimeters of rain. You might here get just about 1,000. If you go into the desert, it quickly drops to maybe 100 millimeters or even less, depending on where you are. They get that. That water, that island is like that. That water falls really fast down, so these walls have to be really big, and they have no wetlands left, and therefore the water is quite polluted. What they started doing is visible on that part of the picture. If you zoom in, you already in the left-hand corner see something there. We go into that, and it looks like this. They have now built within the channel of the river new wetlands. And when they get the flash floods, those wetlands are covered, but they slow down the water. And when the water levels are lower, off-season or outside the rainy season, they help clean up the water in the river, so their water quality has gone up remarkably, just by building in wetlands. They had to do it within the channel because outside the channel would have meant taking down infrastructure and things like that. This is what it looks like now. Huge improvements. So can we not to protect, restore or create new wetlands? No. All countries in the world must act to protect and restore wetlands, create new ones, because of climate change and population dynamics. I'll get to that quickly here. This is predicted climate change for Algeria. Increasing heat extremes, basically all over, is what it says. This is the population prediction for Algeria. More people, more people, more people who need more space, who need more food, more water. Consequences, enormous pressure on demands for clean water. It's already here, I assume, but it will get much worse. Higher demand for food and water. Smaller and fewer wetlands. Loss of hydrological buffering. We saw recently in Libya what happens if you don't have hydrological buffering. Major floods and people died. More polluted water. You cannot clean water artificially enough for it to be clean enough at the scale that we will need it for all kinds of purposes. Loss of biodiversity, less food, damage to infrastructure, spread of disease. These are all due to the fact that wetlands are being destroyed. Reduction of human life expectancy and longevity, etc. There could be more and more and more. And so the cost of the economy would be in the order, and I'm just guessing, billions of euro, trillions of Algerian dinars, and more, perhaps. So these are my conclusions. Protecting wetlands is no longer a choice. This is around the world. And so I think the Academy can perhaps be an instrument to push politically for better protection of wetlands. It will take time, but there are examples where it's been done that we can use. And the United States, in fact, should look at the legislation in China. And when I say that in the United States, they don't like it, but I go, well, they beat you too. Restore existing damaged wetlands. And to what endpoint? You always get the question, what should we restore it to? It does not matter. Create new wetlands to compensate for wetland loss. Again, you get that question, what should they look like? I just showed you a wetland that was created accidentally in the Netherlands. This is a pun on an English expression. If it looks like a wetland, and if it smells like a wetland, it probably is a wetland. And I think that's what we should have worried about most. So then we need to educate people about wetlands. People need to know, that's hard. We need to apply the concept of wise use. We cannot say, well, all people out of this wetland and nobody uses it. That is not helping anything. We need to understand how culturally and traditionally wetlands are used and are being used. We should apply the concept of small city, the more the better. I think a city like Algiers would probably benefit from that, and all other things. So that is what I have for you. And this is a view of Salt Lake City, which, guess what, is getting smaller, or not Salt Lake City, it's the actual Salt Lake, and it's getting smaller and smaller. So, shukran.
Thank you very much. Now we move to the question. Donc, si vous avez des questions,
Yeah, there's a question there.
il y a un micro.
Le micro? There.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so welcome to Algeria. I hope you liked it so far.
Yes. Yes, I do. Yes. Yes.
It's great to hear that. Thank you so much for this insightful presentation. I learned a lot, and especially the maps were beautiful. Actually, we're my favorite teachers.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, the Netherlands did that. So my name is Zubeda, and I'm a PhD student here at this university. I work mainly on groundwater. I'm doing like geophysics for groundwater exploration. And some years ago, I wanted to see the interaction between surface water and groundwater. And this is why I ended up in the Netherlands looking for studies. And I went there and I looked into these exceptional places, and it was really inspiring. And also, yesterday I came back from the southern part of Algeria, in the places where you showed the wetlands. So I think that nowadays it's really complicated for us to manage water in general, whether it's groundwater or surface water. And these places are really important for the ecosystems and for human beings and for animals and for everything. And while I was there, I discussed this with people that were there, and they talked about these ancient techniques that they used to manage their water, and I was like extremely impressed with how precise they were like managing their water and the respect they have for these ecosystems and the knowledge they have about it. So at some point I was wondering where we people messed up, how we ended up in this situation where there is absolutely, like when I talk to people, you know what, we don't have enough water, we don't have enough groundwater, we don't have enough surface water, just protect the water and use it in a safe way, or try not to pollute it at least, try not to just use it in the right way. But these people are always telling me no, because the economy and we need agricultural land, we need to drink more water, we have a lot of population. But I think there is a lot of lessons that we can learn from these techniques, from these ancient techniques that are used, have been used before. And the sad, because you said that it was a sad story. It is a sad story, but I think we should be a bit more optimistic maybe. Like if we have like young people that are motivated enough, they can look into these ancient techniques and see if there is a way for us to apply what these people have been doing for centuries in these really arid areas that have no access to water already. So this was really interesting for me, and it was really eye-opening, because I think the solution is there. It's hard to find it, but it's there. You just need to work on it and find it. So it was really amazing. Thank you so much for that. I was just wondering if you have any ideas about the effect of sea water rise on these wetlands, especially in coastal areas. And by the way, we are actually standing on a wetland here before.
I figured that. Yes. Yeah.
This is actually a wetland, and when I started doing my PhD, because I do it on this area, on groundwater that exists beneath us, so it was, I had no idea
First of all, I congratulate you on trying to combine studies on groundwater and surface water, because traditionally these two disciplines have not been talking to each other. It is amazing. I've been in so many meetings where groundwater people do not understand how surface water people think. So that I congratulate you on that to start with. Yes, it's a depressing story when you think about it, first of all. And I hear you. My son is at the moment 16 years old, and I try to not be the depressing old guy who... the current prognosis for population trends worldwide, by the way, is that it will peak and then decline again. There is a huge change through education, mostly of women, and availability of healthcare, that women are choosing to have less children, and that is a very, very powerful trend at the moment. China population is already going down fairly fast. So I think part of the problems that we have is that we have so many people on Earth. I am strongly convinced that we have gone beyond sustainability with that. Otherwise, how could we have changed the world the way we have? But yes, there are solutions. It's not the doom and, you know. There are two ways that things will change, and that refers to climate change as well. Either we adapt forcefully, or forced, I should say, by things happening. People should not live in New York City. We just need a few more big storms and roads covering, and maybe people getting hurt or dying, and you would think that people then might migrate more inland. And maybe that is something that needs to be here too. Of course, here the problem is a bit more complicated, because more inland means more up, and then soon there is less water, and so that it can be really complicated. But that is if we're forced by nature to move to places where we no longer flood. And on a small scale, you see that already. Where I live in Fargo, there is a river called the Red River of the North. It flows towards Canada and then out to Hudson Bay. It has a very bad record of flooding, and people are no longer building near the river. There are some holdouts, but no longer they're living near the river. They're moving away from it. And the joke in the area is always that the Native Americans, the indigenous people, did not live in that area when the Europeans colonized it. They should have looked at where the native people lived, but they didn't, and they get flooded. So that is one way. The other one is doing it the way it's done in China, and that doesn't go down well in other countries. But I've seen an example where there was a lake, and I'll talk about that. I mentioned it in another presentation, in Canada. But China is building wetland parks, and they have done that very successfully. So they actually create wetlands where there is water, sometimes where there isn't even water. And part of it is to educate people, part of it is to bring down the temperatures in the cities, for instance. The thing I didn't mention, but if you build wetlands within cities, they are cooler. That is a good thing. Well, so this particular example, there was a lake, there is a lake that was highly polluted. They have a scale, 1 through 5, which is used in many countries, also in the insect world, for instance, the Q value. 5 is good, 1 is really bad. This lake was a 4, then suddenly it went to a 3, and the government, local government said, we need to do something about that. So they decided to restore the entire wetlands, but parts of it had been converted for agriculture and for rice, and there were little boats on it by the hundreds. And doing it the Chinese way, first of all, they said, all the boats have to be gone, we cannot have a boat on it anymore, boats gone. Only the minority Yi people, which are indigenous people, are allowed to use the water now. They said, okay, if you had a job, you can get involved in ecotourism, otherwise you have to find a job somewhere else. And they tore down a quarter of a city that was on the lake, where there were people looking out on the water and all that, and And they just said, no, sorry, you can't live there anymore. We need to restore the lake. And so took all that away. They took out all the agriculture, all the rice production, moved it to other places. The cost was in the billions of yen. It was an enormous project. But within 3 years, the water quality went up again to a 4, and it's improving. That is a very costly way, and you know, that is forcing people away. So, but with climate change, the natural way will force us to move, and there may be places where it has to be done forcefully through government regulations. That never will go down well, but otherwise we have people drowning and losing their livelihoods. So it's not an easy solution either way.
Another question? Vous pouvez aussi poser des questions en français si vous voulez. Before, just I would like to add, you were talking about the Fogara, the Fogaras, which is a World Heritage now at the UNESCO, recognized these water measures as a World Heritage to be preserved. And I would like to add 2 layers maybe of pessimism.
Yes, please.
Is this, even this art of Fogaras is being lost. This knowledge is maybe with the elders and the young generation. It's very nice to see young people enthusiastic about it.
We are doing something about it actually. We are making a movie to highlight
nice.
this. We are making a movie, and we're trying to participate in there is actually a water festival. So this water film festival tries to highlight all the problems that are related to water. Not only problems, but anything related, all the stories. It's mainly storytelling about water in general. And we decided to participate next year with a story about the Fogaras and how our ancestors managed their groundwater in an equitable way, which is really impressive.
So you should email me. I had a project in Mexico about water and wetlands. And among the things we did was interview people, and we turned it into a documentary. It's a 1-hour documentary, but there are also short movies, and you can download it for free and show it. It's on a website. It's so yeah, I'm also a filmmaker now. And the traditional uses. So there's now a whole new way of thinking also in ecology on the topic of traditional ecological knowledge, and among indigenous people all over the world, also in the United States. This is very important. Yeah.
About the wetland parks
Yeah.
in Saudi Arabia, they managed to change one wetland that was fairly near Riyadh, the capital.
Yeah.
That was fairly polluted, Al-Hayr, Wadi Al-Hayr, with the beautiful sort of architecture. I think I talked about it in your paper, The Wetlands of Saudi Arabia, and it's the architecture of the trilobite and for water, education.
Yeah.
It's really a very nice ideas, out of the box idea.
Hi, I'm Marion Birchie, and I work as a journalist for the Radio Algeria International.
Yes.
So I have one question for you.
Yes, please.
How do you envision raising awareness about these global changes among local communities in wetlands?
Can you repeat that question?
How do you envision raising awareness in local community about the global changes in wetlands?
That is a tough one. I just mentioned a project in Mexico. I went there doing what I do, worked with a colleague in Mexico, where they already had the project in a mountain range called the Sierra Gorda. It's part of the eastern range, mountain range, Cordillera Oriental, north of Mexico City. And they have a problem there that the people that live on top of the mountains, they have a lot of clean water, but it only falls as rain for 2 months of the year, and then it disappears. The people below in the valleys, they take water for granted just like anybody in the city. It comes out of the tap, you use it, you flush it away, that's it. But when we went in and started talking to people about water and wetlands, it turned out that they all certainly were aware of the problems. What was really lacking was not awareness of the problems, and so it doesn't matter what group of society you have, but the biggest problem turned out to be that they don't talk with each other. So we had a workshop during the weeks that I was there, and somebody raised the question, not criticizing me, but basically asking, well, why would a Dutchman who lives in America come to Mexico and tell us about our problems? I said, of course. I said, I'm not an expert in your country, I'm just here. You know the problems already. I said, but I bet you it's the first time ever that these people that sit here have ever been sitting together. And the point was that we had invited people from the federal government of Mexico, state government of Querétaro, the state of Querétaro, from the universities, from local farmers, anybody. And in the workshop, we had them first talk with each other with affiliated people, so all the farmers together, all the federal people together, and then we mixed them up and had them talk with each other. And I said, I bet you this is the first time you've done it, you know. I said, so all I had to do is come here and organize the meeting. And I think to do that, to bring together people of all these different levels of society, rather than me going there and giving a lecture in some small community, that is not going to do it. But if you have groups, get-togethers like that as a community, then you get somewhere. The same we did. We didn't just have the workshop. We went also to the different communities, and we did have pamphlets and materials. And for every community, we gave all the materials we had to the local school, and they were delighted because they didn't have much materials. I think there needs to be more of that. And part of it is the responsibility of academics like me, and I'm sorry, Ujela, but you too, and every other, professor. There should be less of that distance and people talking with each other. I think that's the important part. And you'll find that all these people that you think might not know about water and wetlands, they know, they just don't necessarily know how to express it. And you also, by doing that, you learn about their real needs. In many of these communities, and I'm sure it's the same here, they would, in the dry season, run out of water, so now the children of the school had to all carry plastic jars, walk to a spring that was 2 kilometers away, and come back to have water for the whole school. That is just, in this day and age, is kind of insane that people have to do it. But that is then their main concern, is where to get clean water. And so we also brought some solutions there. One was already being developed, where in those communities at altitude, they would capture the rain with the roofs of their homes. The rain would be collected in big cisterns, and they would collect 20,000 liters of water during those periods for each home, which is quite amazing. And that would last them well into the dry season. So there are solutions as well.
Thank you.
And that's sort of a roundabout answer.
That's a very good question, really.
Yeah.
Maybe I would just chip in.
Yes, of course.
There are solutions, for example, in Chile, where they do avocado plantations. In Morocco, they have these nets in mountains, soggy mountains, and they collect and they sell it from. And through my windows, I'm not quoting American politician. I can see Alaska through my windows, but I can see real. I'm sorry. I can see Buzizi through my windows, and this mountain is always foggy, and I always dream because where I live, Saraiki, it's a mountain, Mount Saraiki, Mount Idu. there is no water in the summer. And I can see Bouzizi always full of these clouds and fog. And there is a way to exploit that.
Those fog nets are, I have seen them in Mexico.
It's another mountain, it's another hills higher, always foggy in summer, winter. The reason why you're here and it's important because sometimes maybe politicians or maybe the public need to hear different voices. I have this dream in my mind for a number. In fact, I have a paper, manuscript. I haven't published it. It's there about the ecocide. Here in Algeria, we have been deprived of some of the wonderful attributes of cities. When you go to Europe, for example, you find beautiful rivers, urban rivers, whether it's the Thames, whether it's in Amsterdam, or whether beautiful rivers. Where are our rivers? I wanted to. The title of the paper is "Bridge." It's troubled water, bridge over troubled water. Yeah. The song of Simon and Garfunkel, and the subtitle is the river ecocide of Algerian, the ecocide of Algerian rivers. And what happened in the 70s? Okay, there were problems, and our politicians destroyed all the Algerian rivers. The urban rivers disappeared, and they created these ugly canals that everywhere you could go to Béjaïa, Annaba, in the west. Where are they? We have beautiful streams and rivers like Ruisseau d'Or in Algeria with species that have been collected in the 19th century and that no one has seen since. I was in the Natural History Museum a few weeks ago, and you could see species, undescribed sometimes species that have never been. And our generation, we have witnessed this ugly transformation, and that makes living in our cities urban jungle, and also have created this big problem because these altered ecosystem services, this role of absorbing this sponge function of rivers has disappeared. So when you have a medium storm in Algeria now, you have areas like Les Allemands or different cities in Annaba completely flooded. Why? Because you have a watershed, and if you have taken out the rivers, then yeah, the water is there. So it's really a big problem, and my dream, I don't know whether I will see it before I die, is really to restore those rivers. That's really my obsession. And it's nice to see people sharing the same madness and to make sure that you are not mad, that you are not dreaming, that it's possible and people elsewhere have done it. So, very good question.
There's one.
Bonjour tout le monde, donc je vous remercie énormément pour cet exposé. Donc je m'appelle et je suis enseignant au centre universitaire de Kipaza. Je suis chef filière sciences agronomiques. Je suis agronome de formation. Ma question donc c'est comment on peut intégrer, how we can integrate local innovation in the process of creating water nets. En fait, moi, le volet sur lequel j'ai travaillé durant ma thèse et durant mes travaux, c'est comment on peut accompagner l'innovation locale. Parce que parfois, je donne l'exemple de sciences agronomiques, on importe des modèles qui sont ultra perfectionnés,
question
you elaborate?
is, well, it's about how, when you import models, how do you make sure that they are adapted locally? If I understood well your question, and its application on to agriculture.
So,
Adapting imported models
Oh.
to the local reality.
yeah. The first problem I see is that to adopt a model and just put it somewhere else often doesn't work. Because the models in other places are based on local characteristics that may not apply. So one way to maybe do it is to get local people involved in citizen science projects, where what I would think is where you need to enthuse communities to start with, to get together, and you can present these ideas for adaptation and talk about, well, you could do this. In agriculture, for instance, a huge problem is that often you can propose another crop to grow, but the infrastructure may not be there to actually take that crop and bring it to the market. And in the end, a local person needs to, when they grow a crop, they want to make money, right? And so, what I think is you could present these models and communicate with people, have a discussion, and start by asking, well, what would work here, and what will definitely not work? And questions, things that could definitely not work, for instance, is if you are proposing something that is simply unacceptable because of the traditions or cultural ideas about these things. This is very important to bring that in. The citizen science aspect, I've become more and more interested in that, where with modern technology, with these things here, with phones, you can have a little program, an app, for instance, where people can share ideas, maybe, or talk about what works and what doesn't work. One example I mentioned to Dr. Samraoui last night. It's not. I don't know how to translate it to your situation, but in South Africa, I became aware of a situation where there's one plant that grows in one little stream only. It's endemic entirely to that stream. The area has been changing because of human land use changes in agriculture. Weeds have come in that are invading this stream, and those exotic plants use more water per hour than the indigenous species does. So this species is highly endemic. The local people also, they want to keep it. And so they developed this app where they can simply take a picture of the plants, and it will tell them which plant it is. Is it endemic or is it something else? If it is something else that does not belong there, how much water does that plant use compared to the endemic? How much more? And then you can remove it, and you can put in the app that you remove this plant, and it will add up how much water you have saved to the community, and how much water you have saved to contribute to protecting this plant species. It is ideas like that that we need to, and I don't know how it, like I said, how it fits in the context of what you're talking about. But this, with new technology, and turning it, like in this case, into a context. In the end, who has saved the most water by removing these non-native plants? That's a wonderful idea. And so local people are enthusiastic about it, and they get the app, and they all go do it. And so something like that, where you have a little contest with ideas maybe, and you can present them with models from elsewhere, and ask ask about how's it's going, but turn it into a contest that fits on a mobile phone. That can work with 3G, not necessarily 5G, depends on where you are, right? Those ideas, I think, are good. And it goes back to what I said earlier. You need to involve all levels. You need to get the local people to talk with the users, with everybody. That's not always easy. In Mexico, one thing I realized is that the people we did not talk directly to was the gangs, the cartels, that actually control the land use quite a bit. And I imagine there are places here as well that are similar to that, where you need to be careful to talk to the right person. The other group I regretted not involving, and I only realized at the end of the workshop, was the Roman Catholic Church in Mexico. I know that the leader of the church in Querétaro, the Bishop of Querétaro, was in support of our project. I should have invited them to come along for the conversation, and I regret to this day that I didn't do that. So also spiritual and religious leaders, these need to all be involved because they can help influence people to change things. And then you can tweak the models and apply it. Yeah.
The importance of stakeholders.
Stakeholders or actors, it's sometimes called. Yeah.
An example of an important model that didn't work is the aquaculture, freshwater aquaculture in the area of Alcala. In the 80s, they imported different species of carps, put them on the Lake Cubera, a Ramsar site, disaster.
Yeah. Lake
Cubera became a biological desert. So that's really something that wasn't well thought. It was a coastal area. People were used to eat sea fish, and it's one of the areas where fish is really of very good quality, and you plant carps, which a model that has worked in Eastern, Central Europe, and not well adapted in that area. Maybe they've done that somewhere else in Nigeria, but certainly when the carp invaded through rivers or the hydro systems, an ecological disaster. One example of a model that certainly was applied without thinking.
Carp doesn't taste good.
Terrible. Terrible. They have to sell it as chien de mer. Once my mother-in-law came and she bought the fish, they told her it's chien de mer, like a kind of sea.
Dog of the sea.
And really, she cooked it, and she arrived, I remember, 2 meters away, I could smell the carp. Oh. That's terrible. Yeah. D'autres questions?
Oui.
Another question? Yeah. Michel.
Thank you. Thank you, colleague, for your talk. In the definition given by Ramsar Convention, lagoons are considered as wetlands if their depth is less than 6 meters.
Right.
In the definition.
Not only lagoons, but even
Lagoons.
coasts.
Any
Even
water
coastal areas.
Coastal
Coastal areas.
Okay. Do you know why this limit is set 6 meters?
6 meters, yes. Oh, yes.
I complete. And what about estuaries?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, so the 6 meters was purely because the Ramsar Convention was to stop damage to wetlands that are used by birds. So it was really bird enthusiasts. I know somebody who was in the original meeting.
Michael Hoffman.
Yes. And so they had to pick a depth. And these are bird people, so they're talking. So what they decided was that the deepest a duck can dive, there are diving ducks, is a group of ducks. that dive under and they find food to eat and then they come up. The deepest they go is apparently 6 meters. That's why it was ducks. How can you expand that? It goes back to the question I had in China about rice paddies, and I'll give you that example and then explain how it applies here. In China, they said, okay, well, if we don't protect rice paddies, what about rice culture that is more traditional? I've seen places like that where there is one rare species that only grows in those traditional rice paddies, and they can only grow there because of the way the landscape is managed. They would have been extremely rare in the past, in only a few spots. They're now also there, but that's about it. They said, what about if we want to protect that? I said, well, the solution is very simple. You just protect those areas separately as a nature reserve or whatever designation. So I come back to the estuaries. If you have an estuary and you want the deeper points of the estuary also to be included, you can do that by separate legislation. You could say, well, this estuary as a whole, so there's also, for instance, the United Nations Biosphere Reserve. You can use that kind of protection. Or if it's really important, you can just say, well, this is a nature reserve and we're going to restrict certain uses, for instance, no industrial development or things like that. I saw an example like that in Taiwan. There was the threat of a pharmaceutical company being built inside an estuary, completely destroy it. That led to their efforts to get a Wetland Protection Act, which happened. The company was never built, but there were other questions then. There were people using the estuary for oyster production, and they said, well, now we are not bringing the jobs that the industry would have brought. How can we help these people? And I'm sitting there, they used ox carts to go into the water, follow the tide down, and then you could visit the oyster beds and you could go in and find your own. And they did that for me. I said, you need to open this up for ecotourism. People will pay money from the city to do that for a day trip. A few years later I came back and they said, yeah, it worked, we're making money with that. And people from Taipei are coming. So you know, you can use other approaches other than Ramsar. Ramsar is good. It does not protect all wetlands, only wetlands that are considered important wetlands. And it's up to countries to decide which they are and which are not. So in China, that law protects everything that is wetland. And what the consequences are of doing that are not quite known yet. Because if you do that now, central government in China has to come up with a lot of money to support that, to enforce it, to restore wetlands. But they realize certainly that they've gone way too far. They have destroyed so much. When I first went to China, it was open sewers. Rivers were really just open sewers. Everything it smelled bad. It was absolutely horrible. And I've seen that in other places as well. In Pakistan, a friend of mine lives by what used to be a river. It's full of garbage. That's what it is. And so, you know, if you put a law in place and you say we're going to protect it, you need to also come up with money to enforce the law and clean up the river. But that's a different story. But the deeper estuaries, like I said, you could find a special designation for that.
The only problem, Marinus, is that for ecotourism now, labeling an area as a nature reserve doesn't have the same clout, the same label as a Ramsar. And I know some Gulf countries now, they are really keen in designating wadis and wetlands Ramsar, because naming them nature reserve doesn't attract money, doesn't attract tourists, doesn't.
No, but if you have a nationwide law like Korea or Taiwan or China, then you can build in framework for that mechanism is there.
The
It can be done.
another point is that the rice paddies in Europe now support important population of water birds.
Yeah, they do.
And it's
Yeah.
really now a dilemma because they have a road, a new road.
But those
That has
in
to
Europe
be
they're
the-
typically very small. In China, those fields are enormous. I mean, kilometers across. So it's really landscape destruction what they do there.
D'autres questions? Another questions? Another question?
Sorry, I talked a lot.
No, that's good.
It's good, I do too.
Okay. Thanks a lot. But it's not actually a question, but I think the people that brought you here today are the Academy of Science and Technology. I personally never heard of them, but I'm happy that they are doing all this, and I'm looking forward to see what they are going to do next and who are they going to bring. But I just want to say one thing, like it's a sad story, of course, but we people here, like we have a lot of researchers, a lot of professors, a lot of PhD students that are doing work in this domain. Like I have my friend who is working on the sponge city concept in Algiers.
Yeah.
So this is something really interesting. And the problem, the real issue is that there is a huge gap between decision makers and researchers and university and academia. So this is what I think the academy is trying to fill, this gap. This huge gap that exists between academia and decision makers. And I think we have a lot of things to offer. Like a lot of results that are just sitting somewhere in our university library and doing nothing at all. So people should know this. We need to highlight all these researches and all these papers that are published every year and every month. So please just look at these at our work, and I think there are a lot of things that you can use for taking good decisions to manage water in
Future
Africa.
member of the academy, I think. Yeah.
I second that. Well, this is the reason why these people are here. The press is here, the media is here. So credit to them, they make the effort, and hopefully if you help them, and if we help them, they can convey some information, some of your work, and others people work to the general public. It's everybody has to contribute.
C'est Madame Marinus, représentante de la direction générale des Normes. Donc moi, ma question avait été ciblée. Donc moi, je veux avoir l'avis de l'expert concernant les scénarios qui ont été émis par le groupe GIEC, le groupe qui suit le climat à l'échelle mondiale. Est-ce que les scénarios qui ont été effectués d'ici et tracés d'ici 2050, est-ce qu'ils ont un effet sur l'avenir de ces zones humides très fragiles? Donc, est-ce que cela vient
Bien sûr. Madame would like, she is representing the Direction Générale des Forêts. Donc, and probably they have a focal, Ramsar focal person, no? You are? Ah, yeah, sitting next to you. Yeah, she is interested in the latest modelization of climate change scenarios and their possible impacts on what it's on the projects and all that.
Yeah.
That question.
Well, it's not good. Just as the International Panel on Climate Change has predicted, Ramsar has a recent report out as well, and it turns out it is much worse than we thought. When we use more modern approaches to assessing, for instance, the amount amount of wetlands in different places, particularly advances in remote sensing technology. The picture is every time we think it's bad and it turns out it is very bad. When I look at the papers that are coming to the journal that are being submitted for publication, any paper that is on what they call LULC, land use, land change, they all, every time say, we have lost more wetland, we've lost more, that has dried out. I mean, if you look at that image there, that is Salt Lake, by Salt Lake City in Utah. It used to be that big, now it is like that. It's like the Aral Sea, it's just disappearing. I am just guessing, but I think that many of the shots here on the other sides of the mountain have been drying out and have been drying out forever. You can drive through them now, it's terrible. And so, exact numbers I can't give you, but there is a Ramsar report about that and predictions of climate change. I'm guessing it's from a year ago, maybe. And if I can find it, if you remind me, I will share that with you through a link, and we can maybe convey that. I know some of the people that have worked on it, and every time we have a meeting and we sit together, they are more and more depressed. So I'm sorry I don't have better news, but it's not good. Yeah.
Well, of course, there are three scenarios, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
But every time they look at it, it's the ugly and then the ugly.
Of course.
Yeah.
You have to.
It's terrible.
My name is Misha Pak. I'm a university teacher from University of Science and Technology, Ouagadougou. I work a little bit about plankton, exactly. And I'm wondering, ask myself, when we try to create a new wetland, does not the creation of a new wetland have a negative impact on the other ecosystem? I talk about the biodiversity of the other species. That's my question.
Can you repeat? I couldn't. It's just
The creation of new wetland will have a negative impact on.
Does not have a negative impact on the other ecosystem. I talk about biodiversity.
No, I understand the question. Yes. If you look at some of the maps I showed, if you believe those numbers, North Dakota, 50% of the wetlands are gone. So if you create new wetlands there, what you're doing is basically compensating for the loss. So you're impacting on ecosystems that shouldn't be there in the first place because they were there because of agriculture. Okay. Now, if you think about the example in the Netherlands, that ecosystem did not exist. That land was water. It is very clear that what the Dutch have done is they have destroyed one ecosystem to replace another. The Dutch have done that forever. I always say the Netherlands has no nature left. It's one big park. It's one big city in a way. So there, the situation is that much of a wetland that was really a shallow lake has been turned into land, and then the land they couldn't drain because the technology failed, well, they turned it into a wetland, and now it's a national park. People go there, never know it. So yeah, there they created a wetland that didn't exist, replacing it by a wetland that did exist. But that entire system already was destroyed anyway. That whole, it was actually a natural inlet. In the 1930s, they built a dam across, and that became fresh water. So it changed the fisheries, it changed so much. And there are other impacts from that. By keeping the water levels below sea level in all these drained lands, the groundwater level in other places has been coming down. Well, that means that salt water is coming in from outside, goes under the dikes and into areas that are now becoming more and more saline. So yes, there can be negative impacts also from creating a new wetland, for sure. But where it is used to compensate for what has been destroyed, the overall benefits to the landscape is phenomenal. The examples from wetland watch in China, they had a regulation in 2000 which said they had to create 600 new wetlands across the country. 20 years later, they have created 1,200 of them. And for all the places where they've done that, the climate generally has become better in the cities. Where I've seen it, the average temperature of these cities that was through the roof was brought down by creating these new wetlands. But you create one thing, you destroy something else, right? But overall, it is what we need to do to do that. Where I live right now, creating new wetlands and restoring wetlands is a good thing, but what it does do is it pushes farmers back off the land. And I have been very surprised. I've gone to local political meetings where there were proposals to get buffers around wetlands, to not plow all the way to the wetland but stay back. And I went to a meeting which was organized by the conservative Republican Party in the United States. And I went there and went like, oh boy, this is going to be good. And in fact, all the farmers went, well, I'm getting compensated for that, so now I don't have to actually put seed in it, and I don't have to plow it, and then I can get the hay from it, and overall, I get compensation for that. So that is not really negative impact on the land, it's changing the community, but they were all for it, and it actually happened. Now I drive around and these wetlands have a 10-meter buffer around them, and where they have several wetlands close to each other, they're actually allowed to just draw a straight line and put grass in there, and they get compensated for that entire area. And so there's even more protection there of the land, and it's wonderful. And so the most conservative farmers, if you give them money and they have to do less work, they'll do it. So other ecosystems, I think, can only benefit. Natural areas around created wetlands will benefit from having animals migrate there that will maybe come back to drier areas.
If I may chip in, sometimes you have to be careful about counting biodiversity, this trade-off. Because, for example, if you take a salt lake, Nigeria, like Shothodna, you create artificial wetlands by damming the wadis. You may, in fact, increase the biodiversity. Species richness increase, the number of birds will increase, but in fact, it's disastrous ecologically. You are replacing specialized water birds, like greater flamingos, avocels, black-winged snakes, with very common species, worthless species, moorhens, coots, and grebes. And so you have to be careful about biodiversity. There is functional biodiversity, there is phylogenetic biodiversity, etc. So simply looking at biodiversity like this, you may think, oh, these artificial wetlands have in fact been positive, but in fact they have been disastrous ecologically.
And the other way around as well, you need to be careful. Years ago in Dublin, I found out that they were worried about the invasion of a fairly new species, Spartina anglica, and there were reports that birds were declining because of that. There's a whole story behind it which I won't bore you with, but it's interesting. But I went to the people in charge of that area. They were talking about maybe spraying the entire area with herbicides and killing it all. I said, number one, you'll do more damage than you think, and you won't get rid of Spartina anglica. I said, but give me all the money you want to spend on that, and I'll pay students to research it properly. And what we found is that if you looked carefully, the biodiversity, because of this species, had increased by much more than there could ever be a decline talking about some species called in English dunlin decreasing in numbers, but there was a redshank, which is another species which is quite seclusive. And I know from walking around there that there were actually suddenly redshank that never had been there. That's just one example. How do you count one bird against another? But overall, the biodiversity went up.
D'autres questions? Other questions?
They're getting hungry.
I think they are. Thank you so much.
Yeah, can I say so? Please, if you want my contact details, ask the Academy or the doctors here, and somebody will give you that. It's my first name dot last name at ndsu.edu. North Dakota State University.edu.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your contributions, and thank you, Marinus, for this wonderful communication.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
I have a few cards as well, by the way.